It was Saturday, November 1st, 1755, and Lisbon was glowing with life. Dock workers were unloading cargoes of sugar, spices, and gold. The harbor smelled like prosperity itself. Priests were polishing their sermons for All Saints' ready to thunder about sin and salvation to packed congregations. Coach drivers cursed their way through the narrow streets, dodging carts and pedestrians. The city was alive, buzzing, and ready for a holy celebration. Nobody suspected that by sunset, Lisbon would look less like a city and more like a smoldering battlefield. At first, it was just a faint rumble, enough to make church bells jangle. Worshippers thought it was dramatic timing. Maybe God was applauding the sermon. But within seconds, the rumble became a monstrous roar. The ground bucked and twisted with unimaginable violence. Imagine standing in a cathedral, incense still hanging in the air, when suddenly the marble floor beneath you starts behaving like a trampoline. Choir boys screamed, priests clutched their pulpits, and chandeliers swung like drunk acrobats. Houses folded like sandcastles left too long in the sun. Domes cracked and collapsed onto congregations mid-prayer, turning hymns into panicked shrieks. Entire streets split open into yawning fissures, swallowing carts, horses, and unlucky souls who had just been arguing about the price of fish. The quake lasted 6 eternal minutes. 6 minutes. Long enough for someone to recite the Lord's Prayer 3 times, confess their sins, and still have time to regret not paying back their neighbor. Long enough for people to realize that the ground was no longer the solid, dependable friend they thought it was, but a furious bull on meth, tossing the city around like a rag doll. Walls groaned, statues toppled, and fountains sprayed water in every direction as if mocking the chaos. The sound was deafening, a mix of grinding stone, collapsing timber, and the collective screams of 200,000 terrified Lisboetas. Even the river seemed to shudder, waves slapping against the docks as if the Tagus itself was panicking. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the earth grew quiet again. Dust hung in the air like a suffocating curtain. Survivors staggered out of ruins, coughing, bleeding, clutching children, or dragging what little they could carry. For a brief, fragile moment, Lisbon stood still, battered, broken, but breathing. Just as survivors staggered to their feet, coughing in the dust and blinking at the wreckage, the earth decided it wasn't finished. Another aftershock slammed into Lisbon, shorter, but even more brutal. Imagine being punched in the face right after you've crawled out of a collapsed building. That's what it felt like. Historians estimate the quake released the energy of 38,000 nuclear bombs. The city groaned like a wounded animal. Walls that had somehow survived the first quake finally gave up, collapsing in showers of stone. Church towers toppled like dominoes, bells clanging one last chaotic hymn as they crashed to the ground. Falling masonry rained down everywhere, turning narrow streets into death traps. Survivors who had just crawled out of ruins were crushed where they stood. Horses bolted, carts overturned, and terrified citizens screamed as the ground bucked beneath them again. Panic spread like wildfire. People ran in every direction, some clutching children, others dragging what little they had salvaged. The air was thick with dust, screams, and the sound of cracking timbers. Those who had thought the nightmare was over realized with horror that the earth was staging an encore. And this one was even more vicious. Desperate for open space, citizens fled toward the harbor, stumbling over rubble, dodging falling stones, and praying out loud as if sheer volume might convince heaven to intervene. The city was breaking apart, and Lisbon's people were running for their lives. At the Tagus River, Lisbon's citizens saw something extraordinary. The mighty estuary seemed to drain away, exposing its bed for hundreds of meters. To Lisbon's citizens, it looked like Moses parting the Red Sea. Crowds surged forward to marvel at the sight, children squealing, merchants pointing, priests crossing themselves in awe. Some even shouted, "A miracle! Lisbon is saved." But miracles can be cruel. Minutes later, the ocean came roaring back with a vengeance. A colossal tsunami, waves as tall as 6-story buildings, thundered into the city. Ships were hurled inland like toys, crowds were swept away mid-prayer, and the harbor became a watery grave. The miracle turned into a massacre. All Saints' Day meant candles everywhere, in churches, homes, and shrines. When the quake struck, hundreds of lanterns toppled, igniting small fires. At first, they seemed trivial compared to collapsing buildings and raging water. But left unchecked, those flames grew into a firestorm. For 6 days, Lisbon burned. The inferno was so intense it sucked oxygen from the air, suffocating people 30 meters away. Roofs exploded, timbers crackled, and smoke blotted out the sun. Survivors stumbled through streets that looked like the mouth of hell itself. By the time the flames died, the city was a smoldering ruin, its once grand skyline reduced to ash and embers. The numbers are staggering. 50,000 dead, nearly a fifth of Lisbon's population, and 85% of its buildings destroyed. The earthquake, tsunami, and fire together created one of the most devastating disasters in European history. Families vanished, neighborhoods erased, and centuries of art, manuscripts, and treasures lost forever. Lisbon was not just wounded, it was gutted. But Lisbon's tragedy didn't just destroy a city, it shook the very foundations of human thought. Until then, disasters were explained as acts of God, punishments for sin. Yet Lisbon's churches crumbled while brothels and taverns survived. Innocent children died while gamblers lived. How could this be divine justice? Philosophers like Voltaire wrestled with the meaning of suffering, sparking debates that shaped the Enlightenment. Scientists began studying earthquakes systematically, laying the groundwork for modern seismology. Urban planners designed earthquake-resistant cities. Kant suggested earthquakes were caused by gases moving around in caverns deep underground. Yes, he basically imagined the Earth as a giant who had eaten too many beans. Spoiler alert, he was dead wrong. But his idea mattered because it was one of the first attempts to explain earthquakes scientifically, rather than supernaturally. Voltaire, meanwhile, had a philosophical meltdown. If disasters weren't divine punishment, then what did that mean for faith, fate, and the grand plan of the universe? The Lisbon quake didn't just shake buildings, it shook belief itself. Back in Lisbon, chaos reigned. Enter Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo, the Marquis of Pombal. He convinced King José to give him near-total control. His first move? Order the army in. Rubble was cleared, bodies dumped in the sea or burned in mass graves, looters executed on the spot. Behavior improved fast. He sourced grain, capped prices, and kept people fed. He even sent out questionnaires to gather data on the quake, the first systematic earthquake study in history. Pombal reinvented Lisbon. Engineers designed earthquake-resistant buildings, tested by soldiers marching around scale models to mimic tremors. The result was the Pombaline cage, a flexible wooden lattice with diagonal bracing, strong and flexible, still standing centuries later. Narrow medieval streets were replaced with wide boulevards, not for beauty but as fire breaks. The Lisbon earthquake of 1755 remains the most powerful ever recorded in Europe. What began as a day of celebration turned into a nightmare of earth, fire, and water. Tens of thousands died, but from the ashes rose something extraordinary. The idea that the world is governed not by wrathful gods, but by natural laws, laws that can be studied, tested, and understood. That idea, born in the rubble of Lisbon, is the beating heart of modern science. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and share. Every follow helps grow this channel. See you in the next one.